Somehow, against all odds, Captain Reynolds broke through the enemy lines, the A-10 battered but still flying every shutter, a reminder of the destruction she had narrowly survived. The mountains stretched endlessly around her, jagged peaks silhouetted. Against the darkening sky, each shadow a potential threat. Her hands ached from gripping the controls, her muscles screaming from the strain, yet she could not stop. Not now, not when survival was so close. She scanned the horizon, desperately searching for any sign of the distant airfield, or at least a clearing where she could make an emergency landing. The engines coughed and sputtered, sending warning lights flickering across the cockpit. The metal beneath her groaning with each movement. Every decision carried the weight of life and death. She forced herself to focus, each breath measured, each motion deliberate, ignoring the screaming of fatigue that clawed at her body. The fuel gauge dropped steadily, her options shrinking with every second. She could hear the echoes of explosions behind her and felt the heat of tracer fire brushing past the fuselage. The plane shuddered violently, yet she held it steady, banking sharply to avoid a sudden ridge that seemed to rise from nowhere. Her mind raced, calculating the approach, the angle, the speed, every variable that could spell her doom or deliver her life. She saw a faint glimmer of lights on the horizon, a base perhaps, or a beacon guiding her through the darkness. Her heart leapt and sank as doubt flickered across her thoughts. Was it real, or a mirage born of exhaustion and hope? She pressed the throttle forward, the plane lurching under the sudden demand, sparks flying from metal scraping near jagged rocks. The canyon narrowed once, again forcing her to descend dangerously low, every instinct screaming at her to stay alive. The radio remained silent, no words, no guidance. Only the roar of the engines and the distant echo of her own heartbeat. Each second stretched into an eternity, the line between life and death razor thin. She could feel the A-10 trembling beneath her, struggling to hold together as metal strained and systems failed, yet she pressed on, unwilling to surrender. The shadows of the mountains closed in the darkness, pressing against the cockpit windows like hands trying to pull her down. She twisted violently, narrowly avoiding a ridge, her stomach dropping as the fuselage shivered violently. Her breath came in short gasps, her eyes flicking constantly from instruments. To the terrain below, to the horizon where salvation might await, sparks flew from scraped metal, and she realized that the plane might not survive the next impact. Her mind flashed to the commander who had said they would never see her again, and a surge of determination coursed through her. She refused to give up, refused to let the mission end here. She guided the A-10 through a final narrow pass, her hands moving automatically, adjusting throttle flaps and rudder, every motion critical to survival. The wind screamed past the cockpit, the smell of smoke and fuel filling her senses. Her pulse pounded in her ears, each beat a reminder that she was still alive and still fighting. Ahead, the faint outline of the airfield shimmered in the darkness like a promise she could almost touch, but could it be reached? Could the damaged plane hold together long enough to reach it? The engines coughed, warning lights flashing. She gritted her teeth and pushed forward, willing the metal bird beneath her to endure just a little longer. The night seemed to stretch endlessly, each shadow a potential threat, each ridge a possible death trap. Her hands trembled from exhaustion, yet her resolve burned brighter than ever. She knew that one misstep could end everything. But she could not stop, not when the airfield was so close, so tantalizingly near. Dawn broke on the horizon, painting the sky in pale gold as Captain Reynolds guided the battered A-10 toward the distant airfield, the metal bird beneath. Her groaned and shuddered with each maneuver, warning lights flashing desperately across the cockpit. Yet she pressed on forward was the only option. Her determination, the only thing keeping her alive. Her hands ached, her muscles screamed. But she ignored the pain, focusing entirely on the runway that shimmered like a fragile promise ahead. Sparks flew from scraped metal, and the engines coughed, warning that they might fail at any moment. She felt the vibration of the fuselage beneath her, as if the plane itself was pleading for relief, yet she forced it onward. The canyon that had been her prison for so many hours now opened slightly, revealing the terrain below. A mixture of shadows, fire scars, and the first light of morning. Her pulse thundered in her ears, each second stretching endlessly as she calculated every angle, every motion to bring the plane home alive. She twisted and banked narrowly, avoiding jagged ridges that seemed to spring from the earth without warning. The fuselage groaned metal, whining in protest as warning lights flashed frantically. Her stomach dropped as she felt the plane lurch violently from turbulence and stress. The runway seemed impossibly far, each heartbeat a countdown, every breath a measure of her dwindling time. She could see the faint outline of the control tower lights flickering, and for a moment she wondered if they were real or a dream born of desperation. The engines coughed violently, and she knew she had mere minutes before total failure. Yet she refused to surrender. Not when the airfield was so close, not when she had survived so much already. Her hands moved automatically, adjusting throttle flaps and rudder every movement, a delicate balance between life and death. The A-10 shuddered violently as she descended closer to the ground, sparks flying. As metal scraped rocks, she could feel every vibration through the controls. Her breath came in sharp gasps, her eyes flicking constantly from instruments to the runway to the surrounding terrain. The fuel gauge blinked dangerously low, warning that she had very little time left. The shadows of the mountains seemed to reach for her as she banked sharply, narrowly, avoiding another ridge. Her chest burned from adrenaline and effort, yet she pressed forward toward home. The runway grew larger beneath her eyes, scanning for any obstacles or threats. The engines coughed and sputtered, the fuselage flexed with each adjustment, and she felt a shiver of fear mixed with determination. Surge of wind slammed against the plane, her stomach lurching as she corrected with instinct and training. Every second a battle against gravity, against fate, against the limits of the battered machine. Sparks flew from the undercarriage as she lowered the landing gear, carefully coaxing the A-10 to obey her commands. The runway lights shimmered ahead, guiding her through the final stretch. Her heart pounded as she felt the plane tremble violently, each shudder a reminder that one wrong move could end everything. Yet she pressed forward, willing the metal bird to hold together. She touched down with a jolt, sparks flying across the tarmac. The fuselage groaning as it rolled forward, she fought to maintain control, every muscle screaming in protest. The airfield seemed impossibly close, yet impossibly far as the plane crawled forward inch by inch. Her eyes scanned the horizon for threats, for movement, anything that could jeopardize her arrival. She finally came to a stop, breathing heavily, covered in sweat smoke and the smell of burning metal. Her body trembled with exhaustion, yet she allowed herself a fleeting moment of relief. The commander had said they would never see her again, and yet here she was, alive, battered, and victorious. Her eyes scanned the runway and the mountains beyond, wondering what dangers still lurked in the shadows. She knew that the mission was not over yet, that survival was never guaranteed. But for now, she had brought the A-10 home shredded, but unbroken. Hours passed, or maybe minutes. Time had lost all meaning as Captain Reynolds dodged another barrage of fire. The canyon walls pressed in around her, shadows shifting like living predators, every ridge, every cliff, a potential trap. She could feel the vibrations of near misses reverberate through the fuselage, her hands locked on the controls, her knuckles white from the strain. The cockpit glass had spiderweb cracks, and the metal skin of the A-10 groaned as if it were alive, warning her that the plane might not survive much longer. Her mind raced, calculating escape routes, evasive maneuvers. The smallest miscalculation could mean death. Below, she could see the remnants of destroyed vehicles and scorched earth evidence of the enemy's relentless presence. The radio crackled with frantic voices, calling coordinates for support that would never arrive. She pushed the plane into a daring dive, skimming the canyon walls dangerously close to certain death. Her stomach lurched as she narrowly avoided a missile trailing flames that could have easily shredded the fuselage. The engine sputtered, coughing, and warning lights flashed across the dashboard indicating critical system failures. She gritted her teeth and forced the A-10 forward. Each movement a battle between human will and mechanical endurance. Her thoughts flickered to the commander who had said they would never see her again, a phrase that now burned in her mind as she fought to defy it. Every turn required split-second calculations she had practiced countless times in simulations, but nothing had prepared her for this level of chaos. The canyon twisted and turned like a living maze, each curve hiding unknown threats. The sun cast harsh shadows, making it impossible to distinguish enemy positions from natural formations. Tracer fire zipped past her cockpit, sending sparks into the morning sky, each one a reminder that she was still alive, but only barely. She adjusted her flight path, banking hard to avoid a sudden blast that erupted from a ridge to her left, the shockwave rattling the plane violently. Her stomach dropped, and she realized how close death had come again. The fuel gauge flickered ominously, warning that she had limited options. She glanced at the altimeter, noting that she was dangerously low and that even a small mistake could send her plummeting into the jagged rocks below. Every second felt like an hour, her pulse pounding in her ears. She focused on breathing, steadying her mind, forcing herself to remain calm despite the chaos that threatened to overwhelm her. The plane shuddered violently again, alarms blaring a sound she had learned to interpret as immediate danger. She banked sharply to avoid another hidden missile narrowly. Grazing the wingtip, sparks flew into the sky, and she could feel the metal beneath her flexing. Her vision blurred with sweat and adrenaline. Every movement a combination of instinct, training, and sheer will. The canyon opened slightly, offering a brief glimpse of a possible escape route, but it was surrounded on all sides by enemy positions. She hesitated only a fraction of a second that felt like an eternity, calculating whether the move would save her or end her journey. The engines groaned, warning of imminent failure, but she pressed on, daring to hope that the plane would hold together. Her thoughts flickered briefly to her family, to the life she might never see again, to the commander who doubted her, and she let that determination fuel her focus. The sky above seemed to twist and close in the tracer fire, leaving trails of heat and light that could blind or kill. Her hands moved automatically, adjusting throttle flaps and rudder, every movement critical to survival. She felt the A-10 respond violently to each input, metal screaming under the stress, but refusing to give in. The canyon narrowed once again, forcing her into an almost impossible trajectory. She prayed silently for the plane to hold together, for a path to open for her to survive. The sound of the engines struggling filled her ears, every vibration, a reminder of the thin line she walked between life and death. Her eyes darted to every instrument panel, scanning for failures, warnings, anything that could spell disaster. The canyon seemed endless, each turn more perilous than the last. The shadows moved unnaturally. The wind howled like a living creature attempting to push her from the path of survival. She felt fear clawing at her chest, but refused to yield to it. She banked sharply, diving through a narrow pass, her stomach lurching as the A-10 trembled violently. She could see smoke rising from a ridge to her left and realized that the enemy had laid traps at every turn. The fuselage groaned, as if crying out in protest. Her mind worked faster than ever, calculating angles, altitude, and velocity against gravity and threat. Her vision narrowed, tunnel vision, taking over as instinct and training merged into one guiding her through the chaos. She knew that one wrong move, one miscalculation could mean the end. She pressed on, ignoring the shuddering of the plane, the warning alarms, and the screams of the engines. She was alone, the radio silent, the world reduced to metal fire smoke, and the desperate drive to survive. The canyon twisted again, a jagged cliff suddenly appearing in her path. She banked violently, narrowly avoiding impact, and felt the plane groan in protest. Sparks flew across the fuselage and her heart pounded, knowing that each maneuver was pushing the A-10 to the edge of its existence. Night began to fall, casting long shadows across the jagged canyon walls, turning the landscape into a maze of darkness and smoke. Captain Reynolds could barely make out the outlines. Of the cliffs ahead, her vision strained against the fading light and the flickering of warning lights inside the cockpit. The A-10 groaned with each maneuver, metal screaming under stress, yet she pressed forward knowing that stopping was certain death. Every movement was calculated yet instinctive. Each turn a battle against gravity, against the failing aircraft, against the unseen enemy. Below her, the terrain twisted unpredictably, every ridge and crevice a potential trap. The radio remained silent. No voice to guide her, no reassurance, only the echo of her own heartbeat pounding in her ears. Her hands ached from the constant strain, her fingers gripping the controls white from the effort. She could feel the plane flexing under her as if alive, warning her that it might not endure much longer. The canyon seemed to close in with each passing second, narrowing her options, forcing her to dive and climb with precision that left no room for error. Sparks flew as the fuselage scraped near jagged rocks, and she felt her stomach lurch from the violent motions. A sudden flash below illuminated a hidden missile launcher, and she twisted violently, narrowly avoiding impact. The engines coughed. Warning lights flickered desperately, and she realized that every second brought her closer to total failure. Yet she could not stop, not now, not when survival was still within reach. The thought of turning back never crossed her mind. Forward was the only choice, her only hope. The shadows lengthened, and the cold air of night seeped into the cockpit, her fingers stiffening. Yet she ignored the discomfort, focusing entirely on the path ahead. The canyon twisted into a narrow gorge, forcing her to descend rapidly, metal groaning and hydraulics. Straining under the sudden pressure, every heartbeat felt like a countdown, every movement a gamble with fate. She could see faint glimmers of tracer fire weaving through the darkness, barely illuminating the treacherous terrain. She banked sharply, narrowly avoiding the explosion of a nearby ridge, the blast shaking the plane violently. Her pulse surged as she realized how close she had come again. Her mind raced, calculating angles, altitude, velocity, survival, with every instinct screaming at her to keep moving. The plane shuddered violently, the engine sputtering and the fuselage flexing under stress warning lights flashing like stars in the night sky. She gritted her teeth, forcing herself to focus, ignoring the fatigue and fear that threatened to overtake her. Every maneuver a battle against not only the enemy, but the failing machine beneath her. The canyon walls rose and fell like monstrous waves closing in from all sides. Sparks flew from metal scraping rock, and she could feel the vibration through the controls. Her chest burned from adrenaline and effort, each breath sharp and shallow, Her eyes flicked constantly from instruments to terrain to the sky, searching for threats, navigating the treacherous maze of shadows and fire. The fuel gauge blinked ominously, signaling the dwindling reserves. She had precious little time left, and the night offered no mercy. Every movement required precision, yet instinct guided her hands through the chaos. She could feel exhaustion, clawing at her limbs, threatening to slow her reactions, yet she forced herself onward. Her mind raced, calculating the path ahead, the narrow clearings, the impossible turns, each one a knife edge between life and death. A sudden flash illuminated an enemy position, a sniper perhaps, or another missile launcher, and she twisted violently, avoiding the strike, narrowly escaping destruction. The plane groaned violently, warning her that it might not survive the next blow. Yet she pressed forward, banking sharply through a narrow pass, heart pounding, knowing that each second brought her closer to either salvation or doom. The canyon stretched endlessly ahead, twisting and turning, shrouded in smoke and shadow, forcing her to rely on every ounce of skill and will. She could hear the engines straining every vibration, a warning of the limits being tested, yet she refused to yield. The night closed in, threatening to swallow her whole, and she realized that the only way forward was through the darkness into whatever lay beyond. The sun had barely risen over the jagged mountains when Captain Reynolds climbed into her A-10, the engines roaring to life as if sensing the danger that lay ahead. Her team waved from the tarmac, their faces a mixture of pride and fear. The mission was impossible. Intelligence said the area was crawling with enemy anti-aircraft fire, and no one had ever returned from this sector. The commander had looked her in the eye and said, "You won't make it back." The words echoed in her mind as the plane lifted off the runway, slicing through the thin morning clouds. Her heart pounded with a mixture of fear and determination as the terrain below turned into a patchwork of shadows and smoke. Something deep in the canyon caught her eye movement too, quick to be anything but trouble. She tightened her grip on the controls, feeling the familiar weight of responsibility settle over her like armor. The ground rushed beneath her, and she could see the wreckage of previous sorties scattered across, the valleys reminding her that survival was never guaranteed. Every instinct told her to stay sharp, every nerve screamed for caution, yet she pushed the throttle forward, knowing hesitation could be fatal. The wind whipped past the cockpit, and she could feel it tugging at the plane as if testing her resolve. Her mind raced, calculating angles, speed, trajectories, anticipating what lay ahead. A plume of smoke rose from the ridge to her left, and she instinctively banked the plane away narrowly, avoiding the fiery debris. The radio crackled with static voices from other pilots who were already lost in the maze of mountains. Her pulse quickened as she realized that no one could guide her. Now she was truly alone in hostile airspace. The canyon. Walls closed in around her like the jaws of some ancient predator. Every twist and turn more dangerous than the last. She felt the tremor of fear creep into her chest, yet she refused to let it control her. Each decision was a knife-edge balancing, survival against catastrophe. Her eyes darted from panel to panel, tracking fuel, pressure, engine, temperature, weapon systems, all while scanning the sky for threats. She remembered the briefings, the maps, the simulations, but nothing had prepared her for the reality of the chaos below. The enemy could strike at any moment, and the terrain offered no mercy. She banked sharply to avoid a shadow that moved unnaturally against the cliff face, a missile or perhaps something else. Her stomach dropped as she realized that escape routes were narrowing with every passing second. Her training screamed at her to stay calm, but her heartbeat thundered in her ears like a war drum. Each second was a test of skill and nerve as she navigated the labyrinth of rock and smoke. The sun rose higher, exposing hidden dangers, jagged ridges and deep ravines that could tear the plane apart with a single miscalculation. She glanced at the fuel gauge, and the warning lights flickering across the dashboard. Her options were shrinking. She could feel the sweat running down her back despite the cool air blasting through the cockpit. The radio crackled again this time, a brief voice saying Mayday before cutting off, and she realized she might be the last pilot left to face this nightmare. The canyon opened briefly, giving her a glimpse of a possible clearing, but it was surrounded on all sides by the enemy. She adjusted her approach, taking the narrowest path, hoping she would not be seen or targeted. The plane shuddered as she made the maneuver, metal whining and hydraulics straining under the stress. She gritted her teeth, willing the engines to hold, willing the wings not to fail. The wind howled around her, and the smell of smoke and burning fuel filled the cockpit. Each heartbeat seemed to echo like a countdown to disaster. She could see flashes below, tracer fire skimming across the rocks like angry sparks of light. Her mind raced through every possible maneuver, every evasive action that might save her life. She felt her hands tighten on the controls and her knuckles whitening as the A-10 dipped and twisted through the treacherous canyon. Her eyes flicked to the radar, scanning for incoming threats. A sudden blip appeared too close. Too fast, she banked violently, feeling the plane lurch as it barely avoided impact. A shock wave rippled through the fuselage metal, groaning in protest. She swallowed hard, trying to keep her mind focused. She knew that one mistake could end everything, that she had trained for everything she had survived to this point. The mountains seemed to close in on her, every ridge, every shadow, a possible death trap. She could hear the hum of the engines battling against gravity, against fate, against the unseen eyes that sought her destruction. Her chest burned from the adrenaline, from the fear, from the sheer effort of keeping the plane alive. The radio went silent, and she realized that if she did not make it through this canyon, the world would never know the story of her survival. She pushed forward, ignoring the tremor of doubt that crept into her mind. There was no turning back. She could only go forward through the smoke, the fire, the shadows that lurked in the cliffs above. The sun cast long fingers of light across the jagged peaks, illuminating dangers she could barely react to. She banked again, narrowly avoiding a missile that streaked past, leaving a trail of heat and death behind. Her breath caught in her throat as she felt the plane shudder violently, a warning light flickering on the dashboard. She gritted her teeth, knowing that this was only the beginning of the trial that awaited her. The canyon seemed endless, each twist and turn more treacherous than the last. Her mind raced, calculating every possibility, praying that her instincts would not fail her. She could hear the echoes of the commander's words in her head. "You won't make it back." And she wondered if this mission would be the one to prove him wrong, or if it would be the one to claim her life as the mountains stretched endlessly ahead, hiding dangers that could strike without warning, flying low and fast. Captain Reynolds kept the A-10 steady while flares and missiles screamed past her cockpit, warning of the danger that surrounded her. The canyon seemed alive, every rock, every ridge a possible threat. She banked sharply to avoid another missile grazing the wingtip and sending sparks into the sky. Her heart raced and her mind focused entirely on survival. Each maneuver tested the limits of the aircraft and her own skill. The engines roared as she dove through a narrow pass, praying that the heat and smoke would mask her from the enemy below. Tracer fire stitched the air behind her like angry threads, and she felt the vibrations of near misses reverberate through the fuselage. Sweat ran down her face. Her hands ached from gripping the controls, but she could not afford to falter. Every sound, every movement became amplified in the tense silence between attacks. The radio crackled with fragmented voices shouting Mayday and coordinate retreats, and for a brief moment, she wondered if anyone else had survived or if she was the last human left in this deadly sky. She pressed forward, weaving between jagged cliffs, narrowly avoiding the wreckage of previous sorties that littered the mountainside like a tomb of metal and fire. The sun rose higher, casting blinding light across the canyon, forcing her to squint as she calculated her next evasive maneuver. A sudden explosion rocked the left wing, sending a shudder through the plane, alarms blaring and warning lights flickering. Her stomach lurched as she fought to maintain control. She could see smoke trailing from the engine, and knew that she had mere minutes before total failure. The thought of turning back never entered her mind. Forward was the only option. Forward meant life and possibly survival. Her training screamed at her to stay calm, to assess, to react, but fear clung to her chest like a weight she could not shake. Every decision was immediate and final, every moment balanced between living and dying. A shadow moved on the cliff beside her, and she banked sharply, avoiding what she realized could only have been a missile hidden behind the jagged rock. The plane trembled from the near-miss metal, groaning under stress. She swallowed hard and forced herself to breathe, counting each second as if it could prolong her life. The canyon seemed endless, each twist a labyrinth designed to trap her. She glanced at the fuel gauge, the numbers dwindling, and felt panic claw at the edges of her focus. She could not stop, not now. Not when survival was so precariously balanced. The enemy could strike from anywhere, and she knew that even a single mistake could cost her everything. Her mind raced, calculating angles, altitude, trajectories, speed, evasive actions, every instinct screaming at her to stay alive. A distant flare lit up the canyon, illuminating a hidden ridge she had not seen before, and she banked sharply to avoid colliding with it. The plane shuddered violently and warning lights screamed, but she held on. The radio went silent, and she realized that for all intents and purposes, she was completely alone. Her breath came in sharp bursts, her eyes flicking from instruments to the canyon walls to the sky above. She could feel the metal beneath her, flexing, groaning, protesting the stress of combat. Her training carried her through each maneuver, but she could feel exhaustion creeping in, threatening to slow her reactions. The canyon narrowed, forcing her to descend rapidly, and she prayed the A-10 could handle the sudden drop. The wind screamed past her cockpit, and the smell of smoke and burning fuel filled her senses. Tracer rounds zipped past, narrowly missing her fuselage, and she felt a jolt as a shell impacted close enough to shake the plane but not destroy it. Each second stretched like an eternity, and she knew she had to keep moving or die. Her thoughts flickered to the commander who had said, "You won't make it back," and a surge of determination coursed through her. She could not fail, not when survival was still possible. She pushed the Thear,